Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ellie Garrity, and I'm the manager of alumni career programs with the University of Maryland Alumni Association. We're so excited that you're able to join us for today's panel, The Rise of White Collar Crime in Times of Fiscal Uncertainty and COVID-19. This webinar is brought to you in partnership with the University of Maryland's Robert H. Smith School of Business in conjunction with the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences, the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, the Francis King Carey School of Law, and the University of Maryland Alumni Association. This webinar is also part of the Alumni Association's professional development webinar series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Okay, we have a lot of information to cover today, but we want you to get the most out of this webinar panel. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation, and our panelists are happy to answer them. If you have a specific question for one of our panelists, please address him or her by name. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for today's discussion, Edward Lawrence, correspondent at Fox Business Network. Edward covers economic and political breaking news out of the FBN's Washington, D.C. Bureau. During his career, Lawrence has covered a wide range of news stories, including those related to financial crimes, the recently implemented PPP, the China-U.S. trade deal, China's theft of U.S. technology, and China's Thousand Talents plan. Notably, Lawrence has interviewed several major industry titans spanning the business and economic sectors. I'll now turn it over to Edward to get things started. Welcome, Edward.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie. And yeah, welcome to everybody else who's out there watching this discussion. Will be a really good discussion we have today talking about the rise of white-collar crime in time of fiscal uncertainty and COVID-19, the coronavirus we all know. Before we start, I want to say that the viewpoints expressed here are solely the viewpoints of the participants related to this panel discussion, not necessarily where they work or the agency or company that they work for. Now, I did ask the Robert H. Smith School of Business, also the Alumni Association, if we could social distance my square from everyone else, but they said that just wasn't possible getting 6 feet away related to this, so we'll have to risk it on that front. Let me introduce the panelists. We got to get started with this. There's a lot of billable hours that are going here, so we want to get everybody in here. I can tell you we're all University of Maryland graduates or work at the University of Maryland. I was a little fuzzy at reading all the years that everybody graduated. We do know that everybody remembers the first year that Gary Williams was the coach of Maryland basketball there. Now let's start out. Bridget Rohde, she served as the acting U.S. attorney for the Eastern State of New York, as well as the chief. She's been the chief assistant U.S. attorney, special counsel, and chief of criminal division. Also there was a legal career that second to none there. Finally, Sally Simpson, a distinguished professor, and I don't want to get this wrong, director of the Center for the Study of Business Ethics, Regulation, and Crime in the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences and the Robert H. Smith School of Business. Finally, Bruce Dubinsky, he's a managing director at Duff and Phelps. He's a renowned forensic accountant and certified fraud examiner. He specializes in white-collar cases and testifying in state and federal trials. You may have heard of the big one that he was involved in. He was the government's expert witness with the case against Bernie Madoff. I want to get started here. Before we start, though, I do want to acknowledge, the turmoil that has happened across the country in many cities. Our hearts and prayers go out to those who have been terribly affected by what's happening here. Now, today we're going to talk about white-collar crime. And I think the first question that's on my mind, and maybe some other folks out there, is does an economic downturn cause more white-collar crime, or is more white-collar crime revealed because of an economic downturn? And I think Sally might be in a good position to start this off. Sally, what do you think about that?
Well, thank you, Edward. And let me first acknowledge that I'm very pleased to have been invited to participate in the panel, and I look forward to learning a great deal from the other participants who are here. Let me set some context if I can. White-collar crime is not a legal term. And so we need to acknowledge that there are lots of illegal behaviors that are captured under this umbrella term. And scholars of white-collar crime, such as Levy and Smith, have created typologies that focus on white-collar or fraud offenders and victims in order to better classify and understand the different types of white-collar violations. But for now, I think it's important to acknowledge that offenders can include individuals legitimate organizations such as businesses and their representatives, as well as organized criminals. And victims can include individuals, classes of individuals such as consumers and employees, legitimate organizations, clients, and the state. So there are lots of different kinds of people who can be offenders, or organizations who can be offenders, as well as victims. Now, back to the original question, why do we think that white-collar crime might go up during an economic crisis? There are two main explanations that kind of overlap with one another, and one focuses on offenders, which is the fraud triangle, and the other focuses on victimization and increasing the risk of victimization, which is routine activity theory. So the fraud triangle essentially says that when there's pressure, opportunity, and rationalization, you're going to have an increased likelihood of offending. The routine activity theory says that when you have motivated offenders, suitable or vulnerable targets, absent capable guardians, there's an increased risk of victimization when these three things converge in time and space. So what does the research tell us? Well, it's complicated. Don't you love that academic explanation? It's complicated. Some research suggests that certain types of white-collar crimes seem somewhat more likely to appear during periods of economic crisis because there may be more pressure, that people may have a stimulus that's out there that's a new opportunity, or there aren't capable guardians over those new opportunities. But other research has found that during periods of economic boom, you're more likely to have white-collar crimes. And that may also have to do with the supply of motivated offenders, excess opportunities, and uncertainty in the marketplace, for instance. But some other kinds of white-collar crimes seem unrelated to economic conditions at all. Now, there are another number of other issues that make this a complicated answer to try to address, and I think I'll throw it to other people right now and let them participate in.
Yeah, and I wanted to get Bridget's thought on this. Serving as she served as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District in New York. Do you see that? Did you see the white-collar crime increase because of a recession or a downturn, or was it revealed, do you believe, because of that?
I think that both are true. I think that you see opportunity and motive as the big drivers always. If you can reduce it to those two things. So if there's a need for people to have personal protective equipment, and there's an opportunity for someone to acquire it and for it to be, for them to make a buck on it, if they're that motivated to do that, then you'll see increased crime in that area, such as we've seen, and we'll talk more about that later. You'll also see, I think, as things roll out, some of the crimes that you would typically see occur because of the increased financial pressures. So, for example, businesses are going to be under extreme stress. What does that mean? That could mean that when a quarterly report is due, that numbers are fudged. People have projections they're concerned about, or heat from shareholders, or concerned about their own profitability and the commissions that they had expected to make. So I think the one thing that I always see is that there's the need to pivot and be nimble to address these problems, because they are going to manifest in one way or another.
Does the type of white-collar crime, Bridget, do you think changes, that you've seen change?
Well, for example, we're seeing a lot of this PPE being prosecuted, or the acquisition and sale of it being prosecuted under the new implementation of the Defense Production Act. So that clearly is something different, although I would posit that you could still see that charged in many instances under the wire fraud statute. It's going to be to the extent we're talking about products, what product is needed, and that will be the one that will be hoarded and gouged.
John, what about you quickly? The type of crime, white-collar crime, do you think, does that change related to economic downturns or a recession?
I think that you're going to see eventually accounting fraud. I just think, again, it's the context in which it happens. You're going to see accounting fraud. You're going to see insider trading. You're going to see all kinds of false representations and promises, whether it be in documents given to investors or on conference calls. You're going to see the same type of behavior, but in this different context, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and I want to ask Sally, in terms of put on your criminology hat, does the type of offender, do they believe, does a recession open up, does it change the person who's offending or a corporation who's offending? Do those change in times of economic stress?
That's a really good question. I would say that at the corporate level, because that's really more my expertise is corporate crime, I would say that the kinds of pressures that affect big businesses are different than the kinds of pressures that affect small businesses. And it also has a lot to do with how many resources are available to put into compliance programs and lawyers and advisors. And so small businesses may actually be more vulnerable during these recessionary periods because they have fewer resources. But one of the things that I found in my research that I studied anti-competitive behavior was looking at US companies, large companies for the most part, that I found that the more serious kinds of anti-competitive behavior seem to occur more during periods of recession, whereas other kinds of anti-competitive behavior, such as advertising violations and trying to differentiate your product from somebody else's, that seemed to occur during periods of boom. So it may have to do, even within offense types, broad offense types, the different kinds of offenses are more likely under different kinds of economic conditions.
And Bruce, Sally set us up for this. What are you seeing in the environment now today?
So we're starting to see a variety of crimes from the PPE, type crimes at the lower end of the spectrum, up to accounting misstatements. We're seeing things dealing with micro lenders and issues in that marketplace lending, payday lending type issues. I think you're going to see a couple of things. One, Sally and Bridget were right on talking about pressure and opportunity. We'll leave the rationalization part of the fraud triangle out for a minute. Certainly the pressure's there, and you're going to see, despite the market bounce back right now, markets look 6 months down the road. They're looking down the road. Wait till Q2, Q3 earnings start being released and companies aren't making their numbers. They're going to be issues, and that's where, when Bridget was saying, at the corporate level, the pressure is going to increase dramatically at that level to start cooking the books again. And so I think we're going to start seeing that, those types of things increase. Warren Buffett once put it aptly, you only find out who's been swimming naked when the tides go out. And the tides have gone out. And they're gradually coming back, but I think that's going to expose a lot of companies, a lot of risks that were out there. And again, that's at the corporate level. I'm seeing, even personally, an increase in the number of phone calls coming through for IRS scams and, we're about to foreclose on your house, send us money scams. There's been a tremendous increase in telephone traffic. And maybe that's because I'm working from home now and I never was home to hear it before, but I'm seeing that as well going on now. So I think from both levels, we're going to see that.
Bruce, I'm hearing you say then that maybe time could be a trigger. Are there other triggers related to this, or is it just time, the earnings are starting to come up?
Well, I think time equals pressure, right? And companies are going to be under pressure to meet their earnings if they gave adjusted guidance. Some companies have decided not to give any adjusted guidance for the rest of the year. But those that did adjust their guidance then have to meet that guidance. They get punished terribly if they miss by 1 or 2 cents per share. So I think timing is a big play. I think also, when you're doing budgets for companies internally and different divisions, trying to figure out in the midst of a dislocation of business, how do you project out 6 months what that's going to look like? So time is going to expose more and more of this. So I think there's going to be some on the front end, but I think more of this wave we're going to see in about 6 to 8 months, even later, probably 12 months down the road.
And that's looking forward. What about some history, some context with this?
Well, I think if you look at slide 5, for instance, I know we're probably going to jump ahead here, but I put together a slide looking back at the dot-com bust from 98 to kind of the 2003 time period. And I laid that against, let me get to the slide here. There we go. So look back to the 98, it's a 5-year period, and look at the names on that left side of the screen. These are, big companies, and this is just a smattering of the ones that I grabbed that were the more well-known. Look at the financial crisis from 08 to 2011. So we know the financial crisis happened in the middle of 08, really starting in the beginning of 08, but when Lehman collapsed in September of 08 and Freddie and Fannie had their problems, it carried out to 2011, and even the fallout from it was way behind that. Into 2013-14, you still saw companies having problems and a lot of lawsuits going on. So, the pandemic just happened. It happened in this country in the beginning of this year. I think it's going to take some time for this to work its way through and manifest into the cooking of the books, the other frauds that go on along with cooking the books. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of that now. But I think really the wave is going to happen Q4 of 2020, Q1, Q2 of 2021.
One thing I'm noticing, and if we keep that slide up, and Bridget, I wanted to ask you this. The names on these, you have on one side a lot of some energy firms. You have on the other side, on the financial crisis, on the other side of the screen, you have a lot of financial firms. Does each crisis look different in terms of who's affected because of the crisis? Bridget, what have you seen? You might be on mute.
I think this crisis has the potential for affecting companies across the board. So with the financial crisis, of course, you see in investment banks and brokerages and related businesses. And you already pointed out the types of businesses after the dot-com bust. But here, so much of the economy has been negatively affected, with businesses being basically shuttered, workers at home and trying to eke out some portion of what they were doing, but clearly not at full capacity. So there's going to be an awful lot of companies in a lot of different industries having trouble meeting their numbers.
And Bruce, I want to go back and talk to you. Accounting is part of this, right? You're a forensic accountant. When companies look at their accounting going forward and you say fudge the numbers, how does that play into what companies are maybe pushed into a white collar crime?
Sure. Look, there's a lot of misconceptions about the audit industry worldwide being the kind of the numbers police. And while that's not their main role as auditors, they do look and they're supposed to consider fraud. But take this, generally accepted accounting principles, which US companies abide by, is a rules-based type of accounting, meaning there are rules and there are interpretations of those rules, and you're supposed to follow the rules. We all know when there are rules, people figure out how to get around those rules, whether it's in tax law, whatever it may be. The IFRS rules, the International Financial Reporting Standards rules, are more principle-based, meaning look at the situation, look at the facts and circumstances, and do what's right. And even though GAAP is moving towards that, it's not there. So I think what you're going to see, and I've seen this throughout my career, I've kind of coined the term gray book accounting. It's those areas of accounting that are somewhat gray. And we saw this in Enron, and they used special purpose vehicles and off-book accounting that maybe wasn't necessarily in violation of GAAP. People debate that, but it was manipulated. And they manipulated it in a way to hide things from investors. And so when you get into that gray area of accounting standards, when companies are faced with, if they miss their earnings by a penny or 2 pennies, and they get punished by Wall Street, now they start to ask themselves, okay, maybe GAAP says here's the rule, but let's figure out a little bit of a way to get around that. So sometimes it takes, very, very bright people, well-intentioned people, and all of a sudden they find themselves at the top of that ski slope. The skis are just kind of over top that hill, and now they're going down that hill, and they don't know how to stop, so to speak. And that gray book accounting, as I've coined that term, is a dangerous area. People don't understand that while the auditors audit what's GAAP, a lot of what's in financial statements and presentations in 10Ks is non-GAAP financial information. For instance, adjusted EBITDA. We all hear about that. That is a non-GAAP term. A lot of people will tell you, non-GAAP reporting is the type of numbers management talks about when the auditors leave the room, right? And so whether they're coming up with new monikers, whether it's adjusted advertising revenue per quartile, whatever they come up with, then you have to start to question, what does that mean? And if that's driving investor behavior to keep the stock price up, that's when problems occur. So watch out for new terms coming out in 10Ks. Watch out for creative accounting. All of those things, when there's that pressure, goes back to that fraud triangle. When there's pressure and there's opportunity, now management has opportunity to make those changes and calls, and they will then rationalize why they did that. Well, GAAP doesn't say you really can't. Here's a non-GAAP reporting term. Let's go with it. No one will have a problem. That's when the trouble begins.
And I wanted to ask Sally about this, put on her ethics hat. Bruce mentioned the skis going down the hill. Do corporations or people within those corporations think, well, maybe we could fudge the line now and then they can get away with it? What's the thinking, and is there any ethical thinking behind this? Does someone in the room say, hey, this is wrong?
Yeah, the research in that area suggests that there are different types of fraudsters, there are different types of offenders. And the latter category, the ones that are kind of slipping their toe in and think that this is just a one-time thing, and if we can just get through this crisis, we'll go back to our ethical behavior. There are those kinds of offenders. The problem is it's a slippery slope. And research suggests that once you dip your toe in, the next thing you know, your foot's in there, and then your whole leg is in and you can't get out. And a lot of it has, I think, to do with the ethical direction of the organization, who's leading it, what kinds of values are promoted, what the culture is like, what your supervisors are asking you to do officially versus unofficially. So I think corporate culture is a very important component. Organizational structure, the degree to which you can keep secret things that are going on within your divisions or within your subunits. So there are lots of characteristics of organizations that enhance the likelihood that unethical behavior is going to take place, or they can mitigate it. Having meaningful internal compliance systems is a way in which to mitigate it. Being able for mid-level management to bring up to supervisors and upper level management, we have a problem here, and being able to talk about what that problem is and having them listen to you. So the research is pretty clear on these kinds of characteristics that enhance or enhance unethical behavior or mitigate unethical behavior.
And Edward, let me jump in. I agree with Sally. Flip to the next slide if we can, because this is really telling, I think. So this is looking at what I was calling the gray book accounting. Look at where it's gone from 1996. This study was done in 2018. But look at where it went. In 1996, there were 59% of filers were using some sort of non-GAAP metric in their financial filings with the SEC. And the average number of metrics per filing, 2.35. Jump ahead to 2016, 96% of all filers are using non-GAAP filings. And now the number of metrics, the piece of information that they're reporting, has gone from 2.35 to 7.45. That suggests to me that there's a high incentive, and I could tell you this from investigating frauds, being on the ground and investigating, because executives are compensated in many times based on stock options and the price of stock and where that company is going. There's more of a built-in incentive for this type of behavior, for somebody to stick their toe in and realize, okay, that didn't hurt. Now let me put my foot in. I'm still okay. And now they got their whole body submerged at 96%. I'm not saying that all use of non-GAAP information is fraud or bad, but it does leave the ability for people to manipulate numbers because these are the types of things that auditors do not audit. When these types of numbers go into into the financial reporting, these are non-audited type of metrics. So while I do agree with Sally on the research, I will tell you, having been on the ground and investigating, and Bridget can probably talk to this too, you find a lot of people that, yeah, they stuck their toe in, they kind of knew what they were getting into. And once those skis started going down the slope, they were skiing pretty fast and they just kept on going.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to Bridget actually about this, the prosecution side of this. You know, sticking your toe in, sticking your foot, it's still a crime. You know, how do you look at this? How do you look at, I guess, do those companies, is there a ranking? You know, well, this person has their whole, or this company has their whole body in, this company has their foot in. Is it a crime as a crime, or is there a ranking related to that?
That's an excellent question. Basically, look, a crime is a crime in the respect that if the evidence supports the elements of wire fraud, for example, which is often one of the charges, or the element of conspiracy. If the evidence supports that those crimes are committed, then a crime has been committed. But there are definitely factors that the Department of Justice and the United States Attorney's offices consider when looking at whether to prosecute a corporation. And a lot of them have to do, well, there are 9 of them, but they have to do with the type of crime, the extent of the crime, you know, how widespread it is, how far up in management was there an awareness of the crime, so was the leadership involved or condoning of it. There are, you know, many things like that that are considered. One of the things that is considered is what Sally was referring to about compliance. It's important if a company has a compliance program fine-tuned to its risk, and it was both had it on the books and it was up to date, and it was being implemented. All of those things are very important when a prosecutor is considering whether to bring charges and what charges to bring, or when a prosecutor is trying to decide what kind of resolution to reach with the company. So they're among the considerations.
So in Bridget, when you say there are different types of white collar crime, is one more prevalent than the other? You know, wire fraud being one of them. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes, the thing about wire fraud is that it captures many types of criminal behavior. Basically, it's actually, you can put up slide, I think it's slide 7, which has the basic elements of wire fraud. But it's executing or attempting to execute, even trying to execute a scheme or artifice to defraud or to obtain money or property by means of materially false pretenses, representations, or promises using the wires. So if I was talking earlier on about a company that feels under pressure that it's not going to meet its numbers. Well, perhaps it has sent out information to its investors where it has included material misrepresentation. Or perhaps there's a quarterly call and misrepresentations are made during the course of that call. Those types of things constitute wire fraud, and you can see how that could be in a hedge fund situation, it could be in a mutual fund situation, it could be in any type of, it could be in a pension type situation, it could be with respect to a company in any number of industries. So it's a tool that prosecutors often use.
Interesting. And Bridget, before you go, I also wanted to ask you about the type of crime related to corporations and the stock market. We've seen Luckin Coffee, for example, just basically made up numbers. How do you go about prosecuting something like that? When you're talking about companies that it's hard, first of all, it's hard to figure out where those numbers are coming from or how to calculate those numbers, or when they try and cover up. So how do you find crimes like that? And I'm specifically mentioning Luckin Coffee. It's one that's been in the news, and it might have been uncovered because of the coronavirus. But we'll talk about that a little bit, Bridget.
I'll talk a little more broadly than that specific case, but the interesting thing in my view is that many of these same investigative tools are used despite how simple or how complex the case is. That goes back to, I think I may have mentioned, I'm not sure if I did yet, that U.S. attorneys' offices often pair up with their federal law enforcement partners like the FBI or like the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, or they assemble some type of team with a variety of skills so that they can expertly and nimbly address a problem. Often, it begins, knowing there's a problem, begins with some kind of tip. And I use that with a lowercase t. It could be a whistleblower. It could be a witness. It could be someone inside the company. It could be a victim, a disgruntled investor. It could be any of those types of people. But that tip and the nature of the information within it will lead to the use of other investigative techniques. It may be that, let's say the tip included a telephone number. It may be then there's a lot of work done on the telephones to find out the circle of people communicating. It could be that the tip gives cause to subpoena certain documents. It could be, and by documents I also include electronic information. It could be that there's an opportunity to introduce an undercover agent, or there's someone within the company who is willing to speak extensively to be interviewed, and that you can go further, build upon that. And you would do that also with a foreign company. Obviously, it becomes more complicated in that you may need to use devices like a MLAT to get foreign records. But also, especially if the company is generally a reputable company, they may want to work with the prosecutors and collect that information and give it to the prosecutors in order to show their cooperation, in order to mitigate the damage to them, both in terms of money and reputation.
And Bruce, on that front, talking about getting that stuff in, you look through these things. How important, Bridget talked about a whistleblower. How important, for example, is a whistleblower to help direct you in the right direction? Or how do you uncover the things that you uncover?
Sure. Whistleblowers are extremely helpful and extremely important to any investigation. And I think we're going to see more and more whistleblowers coming forward on a lot of fronts. Partly, there's been somewhat of a cottage industry of plaintiff lawyers that kind of went to representing whistleblowers. They know that there's, you can't take retribution against a whistleblower, even though companies routinely do so. So there's financial rewards, both at the government level for being a whistleblower, if it involves, say, a government contractor, and there's private remuneration that can be had. So I think, one, we're going to see more whistleblowers come forward, and they are very helpful. You have to vet them carefully and make sure what they're saying is accurate. I've been involved in many investigations where they thought, the whistleblower really thought something was going on, and they just totally misunderstood what was going on and didn't understand either the accounting or the transaction itself. Sometimes transactions are very complicated. I think also it's not always what you see on the piece of paper that's important. It's what's not on the piece of paper many times during the investigation. So, you'll go in with some sort of predicate of fraud or allegation, and you're trying to either, corroborate the information to prove that or disprove it, can't find countervailing evidence. And sometimes that leads you to things that aren't on the paper. Does it make sense? What is the substance of what is supposedly going on? Can you prove that? And that many times is through the use of documents, through the use of public information on the internet, through the use of information on certain databases, and ultimately then through interviewing people. People are the biggest source of good information once you have your documentary information lined up. So I think we're going to see a rise in a couple things. The use of hotlines has been increasing for ethical reporting, and that's a good thing when they're manned properly and they are and the companies have taken them seriously, and also educated their staff on, we have this hotline. If you see a problem, either raise it to management, or if you don't feel comfortable, call the hotline. We're seeing more of those pop up now. I think there's going to be heavier use, and you're going to see whistleblowers. To your point on the insider trading or market information, FINRA just announced in March, towards the end of March, they saw a 200% increase in complaints being filed with FINRA for market manipulation. They're very concerned about people having inside information about COVID-19 and the impact on the company and what it's doing to the company, and how that would impact the financial health of the company and the stock price, and what are insiders doing with that information. Is it materially non-public information, and are they using it improperly? And like Bridget said, if they are, they may be faxing a family member, or we don't use faxes anymore, emailing that family member, and using the wire, so to speak, the telecommunications to get that information out. That becomes a crime at that point if it's material, non-public information, and they've traded on it.
Yeah, and I want to get Sally's take on this before we go to, we're going to go to a question that we just got in. But Sally, I wanted to ask you, talk about, Bruce says what's not on the paper, regulations. Is that something, is that the importance of having those regulations there? So you know what should be on the paper?
I actually wanted to take this in a little different direction, if I may. What Bridget and Bruce are both talking about are cases that have been uncovered somehow, that someone has blown the whistle, someone has self-reported, and that's so unlike other kinds of crime data. I think it's important to realize that our white-collar crime data are not good. And there's so much more illegal behavior out there that we don't know about. And so the problem is a question of how to discover it, how these cases come forward, how to do a better job of responding to them, and then recognizing that very few cases that, like we're talking about, actually end up in a criminal justice system. Most of the cases of corporate crime are regulatory violations, and they end up in a regulatory venue. And similarly, or a civil case pursuit rather than a criminal case. And Bridget, I'm sure, can talk more about the decision framework that goes into deciding whether to move something criminally or civilly, or in parallel fashion. But it does raise an important question about deterrence. And if we're really interested in whether people think they're going to get caught and how that might affect their behavior, the fact that our data are so poor and we don't have good indicators of how much actual crime is out there is a true problem.
Just a quick follow-up with that. Do you think then in this environment with the coronavirus, we will see more of those regulatory actions, companies being put into that regulatory space for their offenses?
Yeah, I suspect so, in part because the criteria are lower to be able to pursue those kinds of cases. They have more flexibility than our prosecutors do, and it's easier to work with organizations in that kind of way. So yes, I suspect we'll see more regulatory cases emerging now relative to the criminal cases. But criminal cases take a lot more time to develop too. So you may end up with more criminal cases 2 years down the road because they are complex and difficult to pursue.
All right, I want to get to this question from Kyle. How can businesses struggling due to the pandemic reduce expenses on corporate compliance and fraud prevention programs without elevating their fraud risk? That's a really good one. Let's start off maybe with Bruce, since he's looking at this from the front.
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I would say in times when the boat is taking on water, don't throw away the buckets that you're using to bail out the water, so to speak. Compliance programs are very important. Reporting, whether you have an ethics hotline, whether you have different programs in place, whether it's training. Training takes away from time from selling. Let's say you've got ethical training for your salespeople. That takes away from time they could be selling. And if your sales are way down to COVID-19, you want to get them out selling. But it's probably not the time to cut the training at that point. And as Bridget said early on, if a company gets into trouble, one of the first things that the prosecutors look at is what sort of compliance program not only did you have, but were you effectively using it? It's not just, we had a program, it's on the shelf. It's, were you regularly training people? Were you serious and honest about it? Was that the DNA of your organization? And they will take that into consideration in deciding how to charge you and how to pursue on the case. So again, I come back to my bucket analogy. It's probably not the best time to cut those costs. I understand it's tough, but I would caution against that.
And Sally, you want to chime in there on that?
Well, I completely agree with Bruce. I mean, one thing we need to realize is that after the corporate financial crisis, a lot of financial institutions just threw money at hiring people. these people didn't even have a set of tasks in front of them, but these companies wanted to show, hey, look, we're doing something. We've hired 400 new compliance officers. So we've got to be careful about when something is symbolic and when something is really meaningful. And this goes to what Bridget and Bruce have both spoken about. I do think that tone at the top, if you have an organization where the leaders have provided good ethical standards and high expectations, as I said before, where issues can bubble up to top management and they're not trying to hide them and they're open about ethical conversations. I think a lot of compliance programs are not that expensive. Hotlines, internal audits, those are not that expensive to do. Making sure there's open communication. As I said, the culture of the organization really is important. And there are some organizations that might be able to minimize some of the costs associated with compliance because they have a strong ethical culture. Others where there's just, as we say in the environmental area, it's just greenwashing. Those companies are not going to do well under these circumstances if they start cutting into their compliance systems.
And I would add a point to that. It's easier for a large business to maintain those programs. It's much harder for a small to medium-sized business. But I would say small to medium-sized businesses, most of those people, they know who their salespeople are. They know the financial aspect of the business. I would say during these times, start paying more attention to your own financials. Meet with your controller if you have a controller, or your CFO if you're big enough. Dig into the numbers a little bit more than you normally would have. And maybe that will help you to say, you know what, something doesn't make sense over there, and you can nip it in the bud before it becomes a problem. If there's a salesperson that all of a sudden starts posting double-digit sales when everybody else is single-digit, you got to ask yourself, what's going on? Why is that person so successful when the economy's down, or we're not getting contracts now, but that person is? That may lead you to uncovering the fraud at that time. So pay more attention now than other times, I think.
Yeah. Was that person Bernie Madoff? Hey, Bridget, this is a question, another good question that we got in, and this one is for you. What could be the possible initial stages / actions / decisions taken by a suspect that lead to a scam or offense of a white-collar crime? What should be the first priority or requirement that an investigation officer or team needs to take to secure incriminating evidence against them?
Well, it's going to depend on what the crime is, what the crime that's being committed is. So if, for example, and we periodically talk about PPE, it's not the most sophisticated crime going to hoard it and sell it at excessive prices, but it's been happening a lot. There's going to be a tip. It's probably going to be that somebody selling it out of a location. That's going to cause the investigators to do some physical surveillance. That will probably also cause subpoenas or some other method of getting documentation to get any contracts, any invoices, any paper, again, hard or electronically or otherwise, that's going to show that there was an accumulation of the PPE or whatever it is. And then there's going to have to be some interaction with live human beings, whether it's a confidential source that goes in there and is recorded at the direction of agents, or another undercover agent is introduced. Again, it's very fact and circumstances driven, but you're going to want to get the documents that you need, the information from witnesses that you need, hopefully recordings, and build out the elements of whatever offense it is that you hope to charge, so that you can not only bring the charges, but successfully prosecute to conclusion.
And is it, Bridget, is that the same for crimes of opportunity that we're seeing? You mentioned the PPE. I mean, you're not involved in this case at all, but Bobby Singh was the first person charged with violating the Defense Production Act. He was hoarding some of these masks he was buying for 7 cents and then selling them, or trying to sell them to hospitals for over $1. And one of the hospitals tipped off the criminals in New York City. Is it the same for those crimes of opportunity with what you're talking about with holding on and how to come up with this evidence?
Yes, absolutely. I would think that, and I was not involved in that case, but there had to be some information, and whether it's Bobby Singh or someone else doing it, he was selling it at retail allegedly. So were probably people who bought it who complained to someone about the price, and that could be followed up on from there. Agents introducing a source or an undercover to determine if that was in fact the case, and then finding out from the company what it does cost in fact, and comparing that to what was charged, and firming all of that up. So that would be with crime of opportunity, like the CPE. If you're doing a more sophisticated white collar case, you're also getting very deep into the documents to accumulate anything that shows, what are the accounting records, what other, what electronically available information is there from phones, from text, what emails are there. They are always the smoking guns, and you need to get that from appropriate sources and secure it and accumulate it so that you can go into the grand jury and show the grand jury the evidence supporting the charges, and then arrest the person and move it forward to a prosecution.
And you talk about technology, Bridget. I want to ask Bruce something here. You were involved in the Bernie Madoff case. That was what, 10 years ago almost now? And
it is.
What's changed between then and unraveling that case and to the cases that they have to unravel now, today, for this white collar crime?
Yeah. So in that specific case, interestingly enough, Madoff was using computers that were basically 10 years outdated, 15 years outdated. And a lot of information was on the computers, and we were able to secure that information and go back to it. Fast forward 10 years later to today, the amount and volume of information, not only what we call structured data, that's in like an accounting system, that's got a structure to it, but unstructured data, like Bridget was just talking about, emails, text, SMS messages, Jabber messages internally. When you call a call center and they say this call is being recorded for quality assurance, all of that's being recorded. I just worked on a case where we had to take 7 years worth of call center data and get all of that transcribed for the investigation. So from that standpoint, the amount of information that we're dealing with in investigations is exponentially grown. Also add to it, I was just working on an investigation that had manufacturing facilities around the country, 7 different geographic around the world, accounting systems in different languages. So now all the same company, but depending on where the manufacturing was located, it was in a different language. We had to take all that information, try to get it into one database so we could sort through it, so we could see entries being made on one side to the other.
But Bruce, does the volume of information then hide crimes and make it more difficult to find? I ask you and then Bridget that.
It does in a sense, although as more and more people are relying on technology, and there are backups available many times, it's almost easier for us to use technology to go investigate that. So I can sort through 1 million accounting transactions, instantaneously looking for something, whereas years ago, like in Luckin Coffee, you're not going to count every cup of coffee. You can't do that. But when they're selling prepaid vouchers for coffee, that's being recorded. I can now not only look at the volume of that, what days they were being sold, what geographic locations, what IP addresses it's coming in at. So it's made the investigation harder in one sense, but easier at the same time. So you need better skill sets now, but the information is almost easier. I'm not crawling through boxes and going up in old warehouses and dusty boxes going through stuff anymore.
And Bridget, how about the prosecution? I mean, you're talking about like an original mousetrap, so to speak, to catch the mouse, but with technology and more for prosecution, now you have a bigger mousetrap, or a mousetrap that maybe has digital stuff on it. Does technology help the prosecution, or does the volume, does it hinder? Oh, I think you're muted. That pesky mute button. Well, while you're doing that, Sally, same question to you. I mean, do you think technology helping or hurting prosecution of these white collar cases?
I think it depends on the prosecutor's office and how many resources they have available to them. But I do think that big data is taking a huge, it's making a huge impact, both on companies looking at their own data, as well as regulators and prosecutors trying to sort through the information using algorithms to uncover something that looks suspicious. And so I do think big data has really changed the way in which the companies and regulators and prosecutors are utilizing the data to make their cases.
All right, and let's go back to Bridget. You got us now. Victoria actually asked a question related to this. How do you foresee the data analytics being used by companies and by prosecutors in the future of anti-corruption compliance?
Well, to kind of build on what was being said a few minutes ago, I think that the volume of documents and electronically stored information, what it's going to do, what it has done, is it increases the timeline of doing things, but it has made it easier and more efficient in many respects. So long as you know what you're looking for, use the proper search terms, have a methodical approach to addressing this. And so data analytics, it's key. It's key in these huge cases that rely so heavily on data. In terms of with respect to compliance, and I'm envisioning a situation, if I'm understanding the question, where someone within a compliance team can be monitoring in a similar way what's going on within the company to look for any red flags of activity that should be taking place that isn't, or is taking place that shouldn't be. And that reminds me of another point actually I wanted to raise earlier. We were, I think all of us, talking a little bit about the idea of material misrepresentation. I don't want to neglect to say that wire fraud can also be based on material omission. And I think we all kind of touched on it around the fringes, but goes to Bruce's point in particular, sometimes it's what is not said that is so incriminating.
Another question related to this, artificial intelligence. You talk about algorithms. Now let's talk about going one step further. The question is here, artificial intelligence algorithms are either in development or already deployed for rapid detect and analyze business signature information for monetary transactions, movements of materials, purchases of materials, market fluctuations, etc. How does artificial intelligence change this prosecution-wise, and then from the criminal side-wise? And I guess let's start with Bruce, talk about the criminals, maybe.
So, well, it's interesting, just the use of AI, and you're right, it's very prevalent in financial transactions. So you put your credit card on the web, there's a lot of AI that's being used. I was working with American Express and some of their PhDs that have developed the AI for financial detection. That seems to be really on its way and working well. What has not been developed is AI with regard to accounting information and accounting entries, because a lot of judgment goes into, back to what I said under GAAP, should we book this way? Is it deferred revenue? Is it an expense? That requires judgment. And I think at some point AI will get there to help us go through financial information quickly and determine, does that look right or not? And maybe then bring that to the top for further investigation. So I don't think the criminals are going to get a leg up on understanding that and using it for accounting fraud or having a leg up there. I do think they're using it for credit card fraud and all of those other things. They study it. They know some of the techniques. I was dealing with the state of Illinois, their Department of Tax Revenue. When they were giving refunds out on prepaid debit cards, they had a huge fraud problem. And the fraudsters knew the 4 or 5 AI things that they were looking at to determine if it was accurate or not, and then they issued a prepaid refund card. Now they've changed it. So that's a cat and dog, game constantly to stay ahead of. But whether we get there with AI for pure accounting fraud, the jury's out on that.
Sally, ask you about the future of compliance, artificial intelligence, or is it another tool?
Well, I think it's a tool. I mean, the problem with all of these high-tech interventions and strategies is that they do lose the human element. And I do think that they are a tool, and a very important contemporary tool, but you need someone to be making the decisions as to what should go into the algorithm. And so I think that it is important, but it's something that needs to be just one of many tools in the toolbox.
Interesting. There's an interesting question here, and they're getting to bias of regulators. This is from one of the folks who's watching. Is the reality that many companies are already doing? So in terms about the balance of 2020, so they're suggesting that maybe the Justice Department and regulators may be sympathetic to compliance officers' plight related to COVID-19 and some of the things that are arising related to COVID-19. Do you think the future of compliance program and risk bias will be effective, or will that bias be more effective in this COVID environment? Is there a bias, I guess I should say, in the COVID environment? Because sort of letting companies slide a little bit because of what's happened out there. Maybe Sally, if you want to take that one.
I think there's historical precedent for this. Some of the research in which I've been involved has looked at how regulators respond during periods of extreme depression as opposed to recessionary periods. And some of the evidence that I found in documents was that regulators essentially said, we don't want to kick them while they're down. We want our businesses to be successful. We are an economy, we're in a capitalist economy that depends on business success. And if the businesses are really hurting and in bad shape, the regulators may choose to not pursue cases. Moreover, we know that there are always political decisions that are affecting DOJ, for instance. What are the priorities? What do we see on the horizon? What are we going to focus on, individuals or organizations? So there are always decisions that are being made that affect the kind of pattern of cases that come into the system and affect our data. So I do think there's precedent for it. I do think the COVID-19 situation is kind of an unprecedented situation, and that probably is generating some kind of sympathy out there.
So Bridget, I know can't hide from this question. Do you think that a prosecution evolves based on the situation we're in this area when you're talking about white collar crime with corporations?
Well, to start with the compliance issue, the compliance guidance from the Department of Justice has been tweaked just within those past couple of days. So I think there's still a lot of reading and absorbing of it to do to decide what exactly it means. But at first blush, it looks like there's an emphasis on having the compliance resources in place and maybe less of an emphasis on implementation, which would be not having to take them off the hook later for not implementing. It would seem that the guidance has softened, but like I said, it's just out and I'd want to spend more time with it. Look, I think in terms of prosecuting corporations and really we're talking about prosecuting individuals within those corporations, a lot of it hinges on intent. A lot of it hinges on, how black and white is the offense. If things are fuzzier, if the intent can't clearly be proved, then there is often, a decision that has to be made about whether they can really meet the elements of a criminal offense. And maybe this is a way to go back to something Sally said before about, pursuing things criminally, through regulatory processes or civilly. I actually don't think everything should be pursued criminally. First of all, there's crimes and they have certain elements, and you have to be able to prove them beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a higher standard than proving something, by a preponderance of the evidence in a civil matter. Maybe that is the proper way to go out of a particular problem. Maybe a regulatory approach is a better way to be. And you have to have folks who are experienced and can see the nuances and decide under the circumstances what the best approach is. And there is a lot of discretion. It needs to be exercised, in good faith and with good judgment.
So Bridget, how do you choose then if a corporation just gets gets prosecuted, so to speak, or individuals in that corporation get prosecuted for the offenses. I mean, you can look at Wells Fargo as a big example of the fraud that went on in Wells Fargo that was uncovered, but yet the CEO, do you hold somebody, how do you choose who you hold accountable in the company, or if it's just the company itself?
Well, corporate criminal liability is actually very close to strict liability, although it often doesn't look that way in the way it plays out. I mean, we can think about putting individuals in jail. So we often see a focus on individuals, and individuals being the actors to make something happen. Although I would argue that culture is a big part of that, and why are they doing that? In terms of making the decision, again, it goes, one, has a crime, can you prove a crime? And two, I think it goes back to those elements of federal prosecution of a corporation, and how egregious is the offense, how high up does the decision making go, was there any kind of cooperation on the corporation's part in terms of making available documents and witnesses? Was there that compliance program we were talking about before, and was it finding into the risks and actually implemented? At least that used to be the requirement. Has there been remediation? So you look at all of these things. You give the company an opportunity to present on that type of thing, typically in a corporate situation, and there's a very robust discussion about the best way to proceed. You've probably seen in a lot of these corporate prosecutions that the parent company may get a deferred prosecution and basically have to pay some kind of large fine and perhaps have to have a monitor. And then you may see that a subsidiary that's viewed as having been more involved or more on the point takes a guilty plea. And you may see that certain individuals who were really on the forefront making the crime happen have to plead guilty, and that others ended up cooperating and being witnesses. So all of these variables come into play, but that's a pretty typical way for a corporate criminal situation to play out.
So Bruce, from the other side of that, do people feel maybe emboldened inside a corporation that they could push the line, go into the white collar crime, and they won't be held accountable because it's just the company that could be affected?
So we do see that because it's a way to distance yourself from the crime. This was the company, this wasn't me. You can place blame on things. They didn't have systems set up. I was forced into this. So people will distance themselves that way that we've seen. So I think that's a great point. Back to your point earlier on the regulators, I have yet to see in the last 6 months, now this is all new, the kind of softer, gentler, kinder regulator walk in the room. They're not walking in the room saying, hey, we're the regulator, we're your friends, let's sit down and talk. The ones I've dealt with, both on the banking side, financial side, and consumer from the CFPB, have been there because there's an issue that they perceive. They want to get to the bottom of it. They want to protect the constituents that they're, in power to do so. And so I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of sympathy. The other thing that's interesting right now is because of the travel ban, no one's traveling around. Grand juries are not impaneled. I think the federal grand juries are coming back online June 5th or 6th. So those are on hold. State level investigations have all been put on hold. The regulators that I'm talking to on active cases are saying, listen, we can't even come out to interview people right now. So on a civil sense, where there's not that urgency that a crime may have been committed, where somebody's just been murdered, so to speak, those things can wait. The statute of limitations has plenty of time. So I think you're going to see a little bit of lag in some of this till travel opens back up, because you don't want to try to do a Zoom conference and interview a fraudster on the other side of a Zoom camera. That's not really effective.
So wait, Bruce, so if that accountability isn't there, then do you think we're looking at a spike because of the coronavirus as to in cases? Well,
that goes to one of the legs of the fraud triangle, opportunity, right? So when the fox isn't guarding the hen house, so to speak, things happen. And I think that there's an opportunity here for people that want to be involved in crime, and there are plenty of people that do. Let's leave the ones that get involved on a kind of an innocent basis. I think you're going to see a spike. I think you're going to see a spike of insider trading cases, market manipulation cases. Those are easy to perpetrate, so to speak. You have information, like Bridget said, maybe it's you don't tell people certain information, you omit that. That's a crime too, if it's material. So I think we're going to see a spike in that. And I think you're going to see, look, a lot of the regulators, their budgets have been gutted over the last couple of years, and they're struggling mightily. And that's going to be a problem in and of itself. Just how do you get the experienced regulators out there that know what they're doing to investigate this? And they're going to have to prioritize what those cases are. That's at the civil level before it even goes from, say, SEC civil to the criminal side, to DOJ.
Yeah, Sally, I see you shaking your head. You want to chime in on this? You see a spike coming because there's no fox to guard the henhouse?
I do think that the fact that it's not just company resources that have been affected by these economic changes, it's probably going to be worse off for regulators and prosecution down the road. So to the extent that you are going to lack capable guardians, and in Bruce's terms, experienced guardians, we see a lot of people in government that are leaving or have left as resources shrink. So I do think that will open up opportunities for people to think that they can get away with things.
Interesting. The question here, let's take from the audience listening. Will Bitcoin technology, a little bit different tack we're taking here, will Bitcoin technology skyrocket the transfer of illegal gains as a result, as a result of white-collar crimes during the current times in this economic slowdown? And then how do you overcome that on the other side? So maybe let's take how to overcome that with Bridget. We haven't heard from her in a while. What do you think?
Well, certainly, given our contactless way of interacting these days, Bitcoin or something like it fills a void. And Bitcoin, or I'm not even going to just say Bitcoin, but currencies of that nature are often utilized by criminal organizations. So to the extent that crime is being committed by those types of organizations, they already have this, and it's going to be expanded upon, or it's going to be a criminal organization that just pivots to a different type of criminal activity. Yeah, I can see them using that type of currency.
Yeah, Bruce, you want to take that a little bit? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting, and Bridget's right. A lot of criminals will use Bitcoin and other currencies to transact business. What many of them fail to realize is there is a public ledger that can be tracked to a point, right? Once that gets converted back to currency and hard currency, then you lose the trail of it. So I think the experienced criminals understand that now. The kind of the lower end of the criminal chain doesn't. But I think more to how do we use that technology to help prevent frauds? How does the use of a public ledger type of crypto, the way Bitcoin is built, to track, for instance, shipments of PPE and where it's coming from and whose hands did it go through? That can be used very effectively if it's put into place. It's not being used in a widespread manner now, but I think in the next year to 2 years, the technology behind that, and many companies are adopting that technology to their supply chain management, will help to alleviate some of the frauds from a supply chain management perspective.
So in this current environment, and if we could throw up slide number 9, there's a lot of money being thrown around. You're talking about $9 trillion between the monetary side and the fiscal side, and stimulus going forward. And one of the big ones for companies is the Payroll Protection Program. And there, as of the end of last month, the number of loans, 4.5 million loans, we're talking about $510 billion being sent out in 9 weeks. That's a lot of money in a short amount of time by, you see, more than 5,000 different lenders. How do you figure out well, first of all, I guess with this money going out as fast as it has, is there more propensity to have criminal activity because there's so much basically free money that's being flown out there. I guess, Sally, go ahead, take this one.
This is clearly the opportunity leg of that stool. And because it is a new program and it's going out so quickly, it creates all kinds of opportunities, particularly for people who are criminally minded already. So that's, I think, where you're going to find most of this activity, but absolutely, yes. We see it during all kinds of crises. After Hurricane Katrina, and they were doing, they were seeking support for victims of Hurricane Katrina. We immediately saw frauds in that area. We see it after Hurricane Sandy. We've seen it every time this has happened. So with this amount of money in particular, I suspect that there's a lot of fraud going on.
Well, and so on May 5th, prosecutors, for instance, announced that two guys, one from Massachusetts, one from Rhode Island, got nearly $544,000 in forgivable loans for dozens of employees. In one case, there was no business. 4 of the businesses were fraudulent that they had listed. Other businesses had no employees. In fact, one of the businesses they listed and got the loans for, they didn't even own. As a prosecutor, Bridget, how do you look for, I guess the bank would flag something like this, and then what information are you trying to gather to see if this is fraudulent or not fraudulent? How do you break this down and determine whether a business is actually a business and the people are actually there?
Well, it's really a matter of, in the first instance, due diligence. And, typically in the old days or even in the pre-COVID days, it might even have somebody going out and looking to see if there's a physical location and things of that nature. But now, obviously, so much is done online. I think that there could be a fair amount of checking to see what kind of presence that business has online. Obviously, something like that can be created. So you have to go beyond that to try to secure some kind of documentary verification, interviewing live people. But there has to be due diligence that the entity is for real. There are a bunch of different kinds of fraud that could arise connected with this. And it's, excuse me.
Okay, well, Sally, I do want to ask you too, what's the mindset of these people that are doing this? The Treasury Secretary said that this program alone will help 60 million people stay in their jobs. So what's the mindset of someone going out, taking some of this money that could keep some other people in their jobs?
Well, I don't think criminals really care that much about other people and other victims. And so, as I said before, this is not the typology of the person who is the slippery slope offender. These are people who are active fraudsters looking for fraud opportunities. They don't care who they're victimizing. These are the people who take advantage of seniors. These are the people who take advantage of the people who are out on Facebook trying to raise money for someone who's lost a family member to COVID. They don't care. So,
and I was going to go back to Bridget. Is it tough to prosecute these kinds of crimes?
I think it's, as I talked about earlier, we always have to evaluate the facts and circumstances and just find the right investigative tools to do it. So a fraudster is a fraudster. We have to investigate whatever paperwork's put in to get one of these loans, for example, and try to verify what is true or not true. And as I was starting to say before, there could be any number of variations of fraud in this area, and it's always just trying to follow up on that particular type of fraud. I guess one other point I wanted to make about this is all of these programs arise for a reason, and they're valuable programs. And the problem, of course, is that people take advantage of them. There will be a lot of fraud with respect to this because there's a lot of money, but it will still be some percentage of the program. And I think the key is for the governmental agencies to do their due diligence. And just for any potential victims to be on alert. So, for example, I'm going to use a very mundane example, but if employees at a restaurant get a call from the restaurant's owner that would you be willing to work if we were able to get one of these PPP loans, and then the employee never hear back from the restaurant owner, they should be making a call. So there's all kinds of vigilance, whether it's by government investigation or investigators, or by virtue of people who are feeling that they might be being victimized by this because they're not hearing or getting the money that they were supposed to get.
So Bruce, you've looked into a lot of these crimes. How do you prevent someone from taking advantage of say, a payroll protection program? How do you bring that deterrent?
Look, it's really hard. That's the perfect storm. You have a program that was thrust onto the scene, large amounts of money, large amount of banks involved, people very inexperienced on that type of loan product because it's a brand new product with there weren't even regulations out there, like 1 or 2 page guidance on how to underwrite a loan like this. They're being told, underwrite it quickly, you got to get the money out to the people. So all the things that Bridget said that, normally you go out, is there a business there? Look at it, kick the door, does it exist? Was not being done. So it was a perfect storm for a fraudster. It's like shooting a fish in the barrel, so to speak. So, to prevent something like that, I understand there's public policy to roll that program out quickly. You hate to give the money out and then investigate afterwards and try to go claw it back and prosecute people. So maybe there's a lot of politics involved in the political rush to get this out. Maybe there could have been a little more structure on the program. But look, when you have large sums of money like that going out across the country, you're going to have fraud. There's going to be a lot of fraud in it. I think the key now is when it's being investigated that the prosecutions are swift. These people are prosecuted. If they're found guilty, then they're punished properly, both from a monetary restitution. And look, it doesn't make sense to put these people behind bars, is my view. I'd have them out doing community service for the next 3 years with ankle bracelets and reportable. And if they don't show up to do their community service, then throw them behind bars. But there has to be some swift action.
But you could unravel that, right? You could work through that backwards and figure out what the crimes were, what they did.
Absolutely. Look, there are loan applications to get the money. There's going to be representations. They signed under penalties of perjury. They used the wire to get the money. So there's a whole host of tools that the prosecutors can use to go after them. The money was probably wired to a bank account at that bank, then transferred to another bank. They can then see, did these people use it to buy cars or what did they do with the money? So to me, that's a much easier case to prosecute than an accounting fraud case on, well, was that really revenue when Luckin Coffee booked these coupons as advanced revenue? Was there criminal intent? That's hard to prove. That's why most prosecutors don't want to go down that road to deal with that. It's much easier to deal with a fraudster that took 150 grand worth of this loan money on false pretenses. That's a much easier case to prove and get a conviction on.
We have a question sort of down these lines from Melanie, and maybe this is for Sally. What law changes or other government actions should be taken to minimize white-collar crime?
That's a tough question too.
Fraud.
I do think that some of the laws that we have on the books are not particularly effective laws, and that some of the ways in which we pursue violators does not maximize deterrence, shall we say. But on the other hand, different violators are different in terms of what's going to be successful in working with the offender. As Bruce pointed out, sometimes it's not worthwhile to put these people in prison because, teach them a lesson, leave them out, make them work in the community. That may be an effective way to deal with some offenders. Cooperative strategies with companies, for instance, that really are small, they don't have the same kinds of resources that are available to big companies. They didn't really know what they were getting into. They're fairly new companies. Those companies may be having a strategy of cooperation with them and working with them to bring them into compliance, and recognizing when that's going to be a successful strategy and when it's not. I wish there were more research on these topics. I wish we could do a randomized controlled trial to find out when different regulatory interventions are going to be effective and when they're not going to be effective. We know there are different kinds of offenders. What kinds of laws, what kinds of changes in laws are going to be effective with different kinds of offenders? So I would say we need more research before we make any kinds of changes. But that's a typical academic reaction.
Yeah. Well, Bridget, you're involved. Big question, broad question. What could the government change to minimize white collar crime?
Well, I thought that putting an emphasis on compliance in years past was a good strategy, because in making that such an important component of the principles of federal prosecution, and in considering the efforts that were made, the plan and how it was implemented, in the course of deciding whether to charge somebody and what, if any, punishment to mete out. That was a big incentive to having companies take charge of their own shop and have the method and means to detect fraud. First, to try to stop it from happening at all, but to detect it early on if it happened and to put a stop to it. I think as if the emphasis on compliance decreases from the standpoint of Department of Justice or other prosecutorial or regulatory entities, that's going to be a problem. So if anything, I think that the government should be standing behind how important it is for a company to keep its own shop in order.
And does that also go, to your point, does that also go to accountability in who is accountable for what within a company?
Certainly, leadership has to be held responsible. It should not be the case that if the tone from the top is contrary to the one Sally is recommending, right? If there's a company where it's a wink and a nod about whether you have to obey the law and obey the rules and regulations, there should have to be some accountability for that. And the prosecutor shouldn't be prosecuting lower level people if that's, or at least prosecuting them exclusively if the tone from the top is wrong.
Bruce, you want to take a stab at that?
You know, again, I've been involved in a lot of cases, both on the prosecution side. Sometimes I'm hired by defense counsel. Laws are laws. They're written there. Some are better than others. Some leave a lot of room for interpretation. Like take the price gouging law in New York. I think the term is the gross disparity in price before and after. How do you define gross disparity, right? Why not? California's got in there, if the price increases more than 10%, once the state of emergency goes in, then it's price gouging. Okay, so now you have an objective standard. So I think sometimes the legislatures, when they're drafting up laws, they try to do the right thing. I understand that, but sometimes they make it more complex by putting obscure terms in. So one, I think when we look to dealing with fraud and accounting fraud or tax fraud, minimizing the ambiguities in the laws and the ability of people to kind of maneuver between that would help. But you know, back to what Sally said, there are fraudsters that, you know, look, fraud goes back to biblical times. It's not going to go away. It will never go away. And those that want to commit a fraud and have the intent to do so will do so no matter what the law is. You know, the jury's out on deterrence. How do you deter people? I do think you have to hold, as Bridget said, the leadership accountable at companies. It's like the captain of the ship. That's who's in control of the ship, and they're accountable for that. But how you do that is not so easy sometimes.
So in the last 4 minutes, I wanted to ask, white collar crime, the future of white collar crime, do you see the same crimes being dressed up differently? Or is the white collar crime evolving as technology and as we move forward in time? Who wants it? Let's see. Bruce, you want to try that first as you're unmuted?
Sure. You know, I haven't seen new frauds. I mean, a fraud is a fraud. If you're booking the wrong revenue, if you are improperly obtaining a loan, what I've seen is the complexity of the levels of to get through sometimes different entities, offshore entities. We're in a global world. So now it's not just somebody sets up an entity in one state and obtains a loan. They set it up in a state that money goes to a special purpose vehicle in a money laundering jurisdiction offshore. So a little bit more complex, but at the same time, the frauds are the frauds. They're basic frauds. So I haven't seen any Elon Musk type of thinking in developing new frauds, so to speak.
Bridget, have you seen, is white collar crime, is it just dressed up differently, or is there an evolution of it?
I think it all fundamentally comes back to lying, cheating, and stealing, always. And it's just a matter of how it's effectuated. And I think what we've seen with technology is that there are different ways to effectuate committing fraud, which then requires the prosecutors and investigators to have different ways of investigating, being technologically savvy. So yes, I'm always about lying, cheating, and stealing.
Great closing argument. Sally, rebuttal?
No, I concur, but I do think that electronic means of committing fraud is going to be the way it moves forward. And so it's the means to commit it, not the crime itself. I remember talking to Dave Mitchell, who is the chief of police at the University of Maryland campus, about white collar crime, and he held up his phone and he said, "This is the future of white collar crime." So I think that that's a pretty apt way to end this with Dave Mitchell's comment.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Bruce, Sally, Bridget, thank you for the time. Thank you for watching this. Ellie, we will turn it back over to you. What a great discussion we had here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Edward. And a huge thank you to you for handling all of those questions with such grace. And a huge shout out to all of our panelists for joining us today and managing through this Zoom panel. I know we were wanting to have this in person, but appreciate you all showing up virtually for your fellow UMD alumni. Is there anything else that any of you wanted to say before I do a quick wrap up, or anything, Edward, you had on your mind?
Nope, let's just do it next year in person.
It'd be great.
Love it. Sounds great. Well, you can all see that I've put up the email addresses of our panelists and our moderator here. If you have any further questions or want to discuss your personal situation with them, feel free to reach out. I will also be sending out a recording of this panel, so you'll be able to look back on any of the slides or any of the wonderful things our panelists have talked about today. And I'll send that out sometime tomorrow, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And again, huge thank you to everyone who tuned in. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and most importantly, go Terps.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.